Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot and a PMDG 777 beta tester. In today's video we want to have a look into the flight control system of the PMDG Boeing 777 and we want to go over a couple of their functions and how the aircraft handles in different situations. So we're going to start with a little bit of basic information and then we'll take the airplane flying and have a look at a couple of practical examples. So the primary flight control system covers three different modes and they are normal, secondary and direct. This can be seen somewhat similar to Airbus normal law, alternate law and direct law. But of course the Boeing is not an Airbus, so it does handle different under these situations. In general, the aircraft flies like any normal aircraft, but with a couple of enhancements provided in the flight control system. So in normal mode, the aircraft basically is either speed stable or flight path stable. We'll have a look into a bit more of what that means later on in the flight. It also has several flight envelope protections, even though they are not, let's call it, ultimate protections like in the Airbus. The pilot can still bring the airplane in any situation, whilst the Airbus is going to prevent exceeding certain limits, but the protections that the 777 has make it a little bit more difficult to get into those situations. To give you an example, looking into a couple of the flight envelope protections, you have an overspeed protection which works in a way that it limits the maximum speed to which the airplane can be trimmed. At VMO or MMO, the overspeed protection limits the trim reference speed so that the trim is inhibited in the nose down direction. The pilot therefore must apply continuous forward control column force to maintain airspeed above VMO or MMO. Now, likewise, the airplane can have a tail strike protection fitted, and it of course has a stall protection fitted as well. Now, let's go ahead and have a look into how the system works in general. So, the control column does not provide a direct input to the elevator, like you would expect from a conventional airplane. Much rather, the control column sends the inputs to the computer, and the computer then determines the output that the airplane is going to give. Likewise, if you use the thumb switches on the control column to change the trim of the aircraft, then you are going to achieve different results on the ground than you would in the air. On the ground, you can see when I move this, I directly move the stabilizer down here. In the air, however, I am not moving the stabilizer with the switches, but much rather I change the commanded trim speed of the aircraft. Now, the commanded trim speed, or correctly the trim reference speed, basically works in a similar fashion as the target airspeed on the MCP does in level change mode. Now, in the real aircraft you cannot see what your trim reference speed is. Some aircraft, like for example the A220, do show this, the 777 does not. But PMDG gave you an option that you can make it visible, just to make flying a little bit easier if you don't have as sophisticated hardware. Now, personally I recommend to keep it off and just fly the aircraft based out of your feeling, but let me show you where you can find it. So in the FMS menu you go to the PMDG setup, options, simulations, and down here you have show fly-by-wire trim reference speed. If you turn this one on, then you will see that as soon as we are airborne in a few moments, the speed is going to pop up. So for this video we'll keep it active, but I do recommend that you keep it turned off when you actually fly your aircraft. The real one does not show it. Okay, so we're now ready to go, so let's quickly talk about the takeoff. We are going to go over the flight control system now based on the sequence of normal events in a flight. So, as we're about to take off, what is going to happen? Well, our engines run up, we start our acceleration. Now, the first feature that the airplane has available is tail strike protection. Now, you will notice that you are not going to feel anything on the control column, but if you would continuously have a look at the flight control page, then you would see that when the airplane senses that a tail strike is imminent, it is going to decrease your elevator deflection to reduce the potential for tail strike. It's not completely going to protect you, but it is going to reduce the input you make to make it less likely to happen. Activation of tail strike protection does not provide any feedback on the control column, so you just keep your control column here and the elevators just change based on the computer input. Now after that, once we're in the air, the aircraft is going to behave different than on the ground, but we're going to have a look into that in a few moments. So we're ready to go. Let's set our thrust and we'll go and take off. So thrust set. A little bit of forward control column input on the takeoff run. Thrust set. As the speed increases towards 80, our rudder becomes effective. Now we can steer aerodynamically, so the control column goes back to neutral. Okay, so we pull the control column back, the nose comes up, pull a bit more to get through the deadband, positive rate, gear up. And now we establish our target pitch. And you can see that now the fly-by-wire trim reference speed has become active. Now, how does the airplane behave now? Basically, it maintains the input that you've made. So, our speed is constant. The fly-by-wire trim reference speed is adjusted to that current speed. For this reason, the airplane simply maintains the speed now, like a conventional airplane would when it is in trim. Now, if we go ahead and decrease our thrust, for example, and our speed reduces below the trim reference speed, you can see that the plane now pitches down. However, this is not the natural pitch down movement that you would expect from a conventional airplane, but much rather this is your fly-by-wire making the input for you. Now the input will be very small, but if we have a look at the flight control page, then you can kind of see how the elevators are constantly getting moved here as the airplane tries to maintain its trim reference speed and return to it. So let's go ahead and turn the flight directors off and the auto throttle as well, so that we get full manual control over our aircraft. Now you can see, if we start accelerating again, so if I just increase my thrust, you will see that the airplane is going to increase elevator deflection, so that it now tries to resume the trim reference speed once again. Now, when we want to level the aircraft off, then all we got to do, provided that the speed is close to the trim reference speed, is we bring the airplane into the correct pitch, and as long as our indicated airspeed matches the trim reference speed, you will notice that the aircraft is simply going to maintain its flight path, and that is what we call flight path stable. Now, the plane basically has two modes of the fly-by-wire. It can either be flight path stable or it can be speed stable. So when the actual airspeed equals the trim reference speed, then our aircraft is going to be flight path stable. So if we bring the flight path vector in, then you'll notice that the pitch might change, but the flight path in itself is going to stay constant. Now, when we deviate from the trim reference speed, that is when the airplane becomes trim speed stable. So speed stable means that it is going to pitch up or down in order to return to the speed to which it was trimmed. Both of these behaviors happen through the flight computers in the 777, but both of those behaviors basically are how an airplane would behave in the real world without any flight computers as well. So that is natural airplane behavior that is mimicked in the control laws over here. Now let's have a look at an enhancement where the 777 is better than a real-world airplane. So I'm going to turn on the auto throttle over here, and it will maintain my target speed. So let's set the flap 5 speed over here, And this is the normal configuration recommended by Boeing. So Boeing recommends auto throttle on. You are allowed to fly without, it behaves similar to a conventional airplane. But here is one of the great enhancements of the 777. If thrust changes in a conventional airplane, when thrust is added, the nose would pitch up, because the engines are located below the center of gravity. If thrust is reduced, the airplane would pitch down. However, as long as the aircraft maintains the trim reference speed, you will notice that no such effect will occur because the fly-by-wire will correct for it. Let's see that now. We are going to extend the speed brake. Now, extending the speed brake is going to cause devices to deploy on the top of the wing. That would normally cause a nose-up moment. Let's have a look at what's going to happen in the 777. So, I'm extending the speed brake. The engines spool up to correct for that, and you can see without any input, the airplane simply maintains path stable. The fly-by-wire completely corrects the aerodynamic pitching effect of the speed brake, and as long as we maintain the trim reference speed, the plane is not going to change the flight path. You can see slight movement occurs there because we got slightly above the trim reference speed. Now we're back on it. So the airplane now maintains the flight path again. Even though the flight path now is a slight climb, so of course it is going to maintain that slight climb. So if I now make a little input to bring it back into level flight, like this, now the plane is going to maintain that. Okay, now let's retract the speed brake again. And again we can observe the same behavior on the aircraft. Speed brake is in. Very shallow climb, but you can see the aircraft basically corrected for the entire aerodynamic effect. We can cause the same with the flaps or with the landing gear. So let's go ahead and extend the landing gear. A conventional airplane, since the gear is located below the center of gravity, would start pitching down now. The 777, however, doesn't show any reaction to it, because the fly-by-wire completely compensates for it. You can see how there is a slight change there in the elevator deflection, and the stabilizer trim should eventually be adjusted as well. Here we are, landing gear down, and as you can see, no difference in the flight path whatsoever. The airplane has again completely corrected for the input that we made. Okay, let's retract the landing gear again, and we will once again observe the same system behavior. The aircraft completely corrects for any change in the drag that we face from the different system configuration. And here we go, the gear is up, as you can see, completely stable. Okay, now let's go ahead and turn back towards our airfield so that we can start an approach in a few moments. And as we're in the turn, we can already start talking about the next feature of our fly-by-wire system. And that is going to be the compensation of an aileron input. So in a conventional airplane, when you make an aileron input in order to bank the aircraft, that bank means that you have less lift available, supporting you into the upwards direction, and therefore your nose will have a natural tendency to start coming down. Now, this is not going to be the case in the 777. The 777 is going to correct for that loss of lift by automatically pitching the aircraft. Let's go ahead and have a look at an example of such a condition. So let's first of all resume straight and level flight. So here we are, and let's just have a quick look at the nav display, making sure we don't fly too far away from the airport, but this is looking good. Okay, so let's go ahead and have a look at this. So in general, with moderate bank angles, you can simply apply aileron without having to apply any elevator input. Let's go ahead and have a look at an example. Now, Let's make sure that we go exactly into level flight. Well, I tend to say this is looking good. So I'm just going to add a little bit of bank now, and I will not pull on the control column at all. In a conventional aircraft, when you apply aileron, you would also have to pull slightly in order to maintain your altitude. In the 777, that's not the case, so let's go ahead and try that. This is only aileron now. And only above a certain bank angle we will notice that the aircraft will start a little descent. What we can see is that the aircraft has slightly increased its pitch in order to maintain the altitude. And this is 20 degrees angle of bank now. Okay, that's a little QNH change in the sim there. Let's press B. Okay, and now we're going to go back into level flight. Again, only aileron, no elevator. And you can see, once again, it adjusts the pitch. Even though it's just a slight adjustment, it's maybe a degree of pitch that we see changing here. But it's still maintaining altitude. Only when you go to 25 degrees angle of bank and more, that is where you need to manually pull a little bit, because you're approaching the maximum bank angle that you're supposed to fly. So let's give this one a try again. So, approaching and overshooting 20, and here you can see if we go to 30 degrees, it does apply correction, but a very slight descent is the result, and that is exactly how the 777 should behave. So let's bring it back to wings level flight now. So what is the general idea behind this behavior of the aircraft? The general idea is that when you fly only moderate turns, you only need an aileron input, so the aircraft slightly enhances your control characteristics there. However, when you go into a steep turn and when you approach the limit of what is acceptable in terms of bank angle, remember 30 degrees should be maximum, 25 should be normal. Therefore, if you approach 25 and go beyond that, the plane starts descending a little bit, which gives you a little bit of feedback on your controls there. So Boeing kinda mimics real life or conventional airplane behavior there, but it again provides you with a little bit of an enhancement to how a normal aircraft would feel. So if you want to fly a turn at say 30 degrees angle of bank, let's go ahead and try that. We'll make a left hand turn here to heading north. If I want to maintain altitude during that, from about 20 degrees bank I need to pull a little bit, as you can see, in order to compensate for the loss of lift, like I would have to do on a conventional airplane. So when you do only small turns, the aircraft enhances you a little bit. When you do larger turns, then you need to provide some conventional flight control input there. Again, it feels pretty natural when the aircraft is handled like this, but overall it does provide you with a little bit of an enhancement. Okay, so we're back in a normal flight, heading 010 roundabout. Now let's go ahead and start the next thing, and that is acceleration and deceleration. So normally, as an aircraft accelerates, you would need to apply nose down trim. Likewise, if the aircraft decelerates, you would need to apply nose up trim. Speed changes are the one thing for which you actually need to apply trim. Remember, our trim reference speed has been constant the entire way, so we never hit the trim buttons once. Now, as we are about to change speed, that is when we need to start trimming the aircraft. So let's return to 4,000 feet first of all. Slight pitch up. I set the target flight path. We're on the trim reference speed, so the flight path stays. That's how the C*U logic works. Now as we're going to approach our altitude, I just pitch it back down, and since we remain on speed, the airplane is simply going to maintain its flight path that I'm setting. And here we go. So now let's go ahead and accelerate the aircraft. So I'm going to disconnect the auto throttle here. First of all, let's match that setting. Here we go. Auto throttle disconnect. And now let's go ahead and accelerate. As we accelerate, we will initially keep the flaps where they are, just to show you how the principle works. And then we will talk about flap retraction in a moment. So, increasing my target speed here. At first it compensates for the difference in CG, but now that we accelerate, we need to apply nose down control column and trim in order to maintain the trim reference speed where it's supposed to be. Now you will notice that as long as you maintain the trim reference speed close to where the aircraft is actually in terms of airspeed, it will simply behave like a conventional aircraft that you are trimming as you accelerate. So let's go 230 knots, we'll maintain it there. So, here we go. Releasing the control column, and here we go. Level. Now let's go ahead and retract the flaps. Similarly to the other devices I showed you earlier, like the landing gear and the spoilers, a flap extension or retraction is not going to cause any trim moment. So, let's go flaps 1. As you can see at the bottom, I'm not touching the control columns at all. Yeah, let's cancel this. And as long as we maintain the trim reference speed, there is no trimming needed. Let's just turn on the auto throttle so that we can see the effect even better. As we depart from the trim reference speed, that is of course when the aircraft will start to need some trim. So let's first of all turn that auto throttle on, return to 4,000 feet, and as soon as we're back at the target speed and at the target altitude, I will retract the flaps to 0, and then we will have a look at the resultant need for trim, which basically is not going to be there. So here we are. Auto throttle is maintaining that speed. Now I'm retracting the flaps completely. And you will notice that we will not need to trim the aircraft at all. It is simply going to maintain the numbers that we have previously set. Here we are. Okay, now let's go ahead and have a look at what happens when we adjust our speed without trimming for the speed. So, auto throttle off, increase thrust, and as soon as our speed increases above a certain error margin around the trim speed, you can see that the airplane pitches to maintain its speed. Now that's the speed stability. Anything else that we've previously demoed is the path stability. As you can see, easy going, the aircraft is doing exactly what a conventional airplane would do over here. Okay, so that much about our general flight path. Now let's go ahead and fly an approach and see what is going to happen and how it is going to behave on the approach. In general, the aircraft maintains its target values very nicely. So let's go down towards 2,000 feet. We'll set the target airspeed towards the flap up speed, trim it so that we maintain the up speed. Here we go. And now everything's set. As we fly the approach, the only thing we need to worry about in terms of flight controls is actually trimming the aircraft to be on the correct speed. And this, again, works like a conventional aeroplane. So if you feel that you need to constantly pull on the control column, you probably gotta trim a little bit nose up. If you probably feel that you constantly have to push on the control column, apply a little bit of trim nose down. That's conventional aeroplane behavior that we are going to notice there. So let's establish on an intercept heading here. Flaps 1. Turn the target speed down to the 1 speed. And what you'll notice is, well, we'll just have to pitch up a little bit to lose that speed. What you'll notice is, let me show you that control column down here. Basically, for every couple of knots I lose, I just apply one small click on the thumb switches. So Let's see that. We're trimmed to, say, 219. Now I just do a single click, and the trim jumps down to our present airspeed. That is called the blip trim. Now, blip trim basically means I'm within a couple knots of the target speed. Hey, bring my trim speed right to my target. So, let's go ahead and level off in 2000, crossing the localizer, don't worry about it. So, as our speed now comes down, we basically don't need to touch the control column. All we gotta do is update that trim speed every now and then. So, little blip, and here we go. Now maintaining 2000, please. And again, when you're too far, when your actual airspeed is too far from the target, then you can just change the target speed by trimming up and down. If you're close to the target, a little blip immediately updates it. Okay, now let's resume 2000 feet and we'll make a right-hand turn onto the final so that we can demonstrate what things are going to look like in the final approach. Maybe a small demo as we're on the way of our stall protection. So, I told you earlier that the airplane protects you against stalls by limiting what you can do with your trim. So let's have a look at that. You can see I can't move the trim speed, even though I am holding the trim switches down. I can't move it below the minimum maneuver speed. When I enter that, auto thrust comes active and starts accelerating again. So basically you are protected against stalling the aircraft. And as I pull more G-forces, you can see how my trim speed even increases. And now if I let go again, you can see that's my new trim speed. That's what the aircraft is going to fly. And that's about as easy as it gets. So, let's climb towards 2000 now. We're going to set flaps 5. Reduce our target speed to the flap 5 speed. And now we'll bring the aircraft into a nice position to start the approach. Again, blip trim can be used so that you can easily update your trim reference speed. So maintain 2000 over here. I was a little bit aggressive, but we're sitting here alone in our aircraft anyway, so it's not going to be a problem. Okay, we're going to do a flap 30 approach over here. Again, small blips on the trim, update the trim speed exactly to where you want it to be. So use the blip trim, it's really your best friend. And now we're going to intercept our final approach. Localizer should come alive any moment, and once it is alive, we're going to bring the airplane into landing configuration. Okay, will you please? Here it comes, localizer alive. Let's turn to the final. Again, only above approximately 20 degrees. That is when we need some control column in order to maintain the altitude. And getting back out of it again. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring the airplane into landing configuration. Gear down, flaps 20, speed brakes armed, and first of all you'll notice that our flight path simply stays constant. That's because the airplane again compensates for the effects of the landing gear and the flaps. Likewise, we can do the same if we now go flaps 30. You will again notice that, well, we do get a load relief because we're above the maximum speed for flaps 30, but again, we don't need to trim at all. The airplane simply maintains where we are. So let's bring the speed down to VREF now. Of course, we got to apply a little bit of trim as we are slowing down. Otherwise, the airplane will naturally start its descent like a conventional airplane would. Okay, here we go, on the target speed. And we're catching the glide slope, so let's go ahead and initiate our descent. And now comes one of the very, very nice features of the Boeing 777. Since when you're on speed, the aircraft is flight path stable, It means that once we have adjusted to the glide slope, the airplane is simply going to maintain that. You will not have to apply many corrections once you are stable on the ILS. So a little localizer here. Bring it right on the loc, bring it right on the glide, establish the 3-degree descent path, and once that is established, we basically don't need to do many inputs anymore. The only thing that we have to correct for then are external influences, such as thermals, such as gusts, and all these good things. Those we need to correct for, because the airplane might not be as fast as would ideally be applicable here, but as you can see, very small inputs now that we are on the trim reference speed 1000 basically maintain the values we've set. So I'm basically not doing anything here. Just got to be careful that you've got wings level, you've got the target's glide path, and as you can see, if the plane is in trim, it's perfectly going to follow what you have commanded. Now we can simply fly it down like this. 500. As you can see, I'm literally doing nothing over here. We might get a caution for it in a few moments that we haven't completed the normal checklists. Or we might not. Both is fine with me. As you can see, no input at all on the control column. Yeah, here comes the caution that we haven't completed the landing checklist. We'll not worry about that for now. Okay, and now let's look outside, see that runway, and fly the airplane down. Of course, this was a little bit of an exaggeration here for how you need to do nothing on the approach. Okay, entering 30 feet, we'll get a nose down input,
20.
Which we are going to counter by pulling up, flaring the aircraft on the ground. Lower the nose carefully, and here we are. That's the flight control system of the Boeing 777 for you. About as easy as it gets. I do have to say, it is a very intuitive fly-by-wire system. Quite different from Airbus, but people commonly refer to fly-by-wire and mean the Airbus control logic, while indeed, always remember, all that fly-by-wire means is that you don't have a direct physical connection between the control column and the control surfaces, but that there is some computers in between and that you've got electrical signals. So, that's the Boeing 777 fly-by-wire for you. I sure hope that you enjoyed this one. Give me your feedback in the comments below. I'm very much looking forward to it. Let me know how you like the behavior of the 777 and let me know how you like how the 777 flies. I hope I could shed a little bit of light into the tunnel for some of you who maybe had some issues with the 777 and manually flying it, but overall it really flies like a very natural airplane with a couple of enhancements that make your life a lot easier. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this one. Give me your feedback in the comments below and like, comment and subscribe. And finally, if you really like what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching and see you all again on the next one.